Massachusetts. I'm Barry Nolan, and this lecture is one of a series of online dialogues with the Boston Global Forum's G7 Summit initiative. In Malcolm Gladwell's widely read book, The Tipping Point, he uses the model of epidemics to examine how seemingly little things can make a big difference, things that affect us all. For instance, in one of his chapters, he talks about Sesame Street and looks at how producers achieve much greater stickiness with their content by making some relatively small changes. Research showed them that when the word of the day, say cybersecurity, for instance, was placed in the lower third of the screen, it worked much better than putting it right in the middle of my chest. The kids just remembered it better. Learning about how we learn can make a very big difference. And that is one of the reasons that the UN launched the Global Education First initiative in 2012. It has the goal of putting every child in school, improving the quality of learning, and fostering a sense of global citizenship. Now, that term, global citizenship, refers to that deeply felt sense of belonging to a broader community and common humanity, recognizing that, like it or not, the ancient truth is still valid that we are all interconnected. As I believe John Donne wrote in 1624, "Do not send to know for whom the climate change-driven ocean level rises. It rises for thee, pal." The current American presidential race has in many ways put our connections front and center in our international dialogue. And it is really what we should be talking about. As Alexander Pope put it back in 1733, the proper study of mankind is man. And there are few better qualified to shed light on this issue than our special guest tonight. Dr. Carlos Alberto Torres is a distinguished professor, a researcher and author, a political sociologist of education of the first order. His area of particular interest is the impact of globalization on K-12 through higher education. He's also a guy who gets around. He did his undergraduate work in Argentina, his MA in Mexico, his PhD at Stanford, and his postdoctoral studies in educational foundations in Canada. He is currently the Distinguished Professor of Social Sciences and Comparative Education at UCLA, the chair of UNESCO's Global Learning and Global Citizenship Education, and he is the former director of the UCLA Latin American Center. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Torres.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nolan. It's a pleasure to be here tonight, speaking from Topanga, California, in a day that is gray and cold, very unusual for California, which shows us that global warming has unpredictable effects in many places. We are congregated here to talk about global citizenship education. And I would love to start with one important statement. I have been writing about this for many, many years, and I have become absolutely convinced that global citizenship education contributes to global peace. So, in essence, I think we are facing a world, and we are at the crossroads of civilizations in which a number of problems, if I may speak in religious terms, I will say sins of humankind, are deeply affecting the way we live and the way we try to prosper, and essentially the way we try to be happy. Let me offer you 5 cluster problems, which, taken all together, explains why we need global citizenship education. The first one is inequality. It is very clear that in the last 60 to 70 years, the degree of inequality has increased in the world. There is a very lovely, very large book by Thomas Piketty explaining why did it happen, and explaining that education could be one of the answers. But we need answers at the level of public policy, and we need answers at the level of citizenship making. Inequality has grown so much that few individuals now hold the wealth of many countries combined. And that was absolutely unexpected at the end of the Second World War. In fact, the end of the Second World War, after fascism was defeated, produced a sense of optimism which percolated through all sorts of levels. It percolated because reconstruction after the war will demand resources and people will go to work. It percolated because people who have survived the war were ready to start a new life, having defeated one of the evils of humankind. It was also enthusiastic because after the Second World War, Europe was ready to reshuffle the deck and recreate in a different understanding of relationship among countries. You have to remember that a lot of the great wars in the 20th century were very much connected with Europe, either among the countries or in the question of fighting for the colonial perspectives of many of the colonialists in Europe. So it was a time of optimism, but it was very clear that income distribution was not as unequal as it is now. So I think that would be my first point. In order to solve some of the problems of inequality, we need to develop a very robust model of citizenship and a very important international model of global citizenship. But there is more. Poverty is another of the great cluster of problems we are facing today. The World Bank has indicated in its last report about poverty that 1/7 of the world, that's essentially 1 billion people, live with an income under $1.25 a day, which for some of us could sound absolutely incredible in the developing world, but in some part of the world, it is not. There's a third element which I think has created a much more complicated scenario, and is what I will have termed in many of my writings neoliberal globalization. Neoliberal globalization is based on two principles, which are difficult to accept per se. One is that public policy has completely failed and the solution is to privatize everything. And in that context, one of the main principles of the nation state, which is to protect the common good, will be deeply affected because the common good will be undermined by individual interests. The second element is the question of possessive individualism. The idea that individuals possess qualities, possess talent, skills, dexterities, and these are absolutely their own doing, that they owe nothing to society and nothing to anybody. I am an individual who possesses qualities, and therefore it is up to me to develop these qualities and enjoy life appropriating the resources that this quality permits me to appropriate. So what happened of those who never had the opportunity, or then never had the access, that never have really some of those qualities? What's going to happen to them? And the answer in the traditional welfare state was, well, the welfare state should procure elements so those who have never had the opportunity have the opportunity. Those who don't have the same talent that everybody else could live a reasonable life. So essentially, there was an element of organized solidarity. When you have this idea of possessive individualism, the idea of solidarity disappears. It's me, only me, and it's only for me and my family. So in that context, I think neoliberal globalization has created a model of wild capitalism. And we have seen this in 2007, 2008, in which the capitalist system was brought to its own knees because unethical speculation, particularly by a particular segment of the capitalist sector, which was the financial sector. The fourth element, which I consider drastic and important, is what Paulo Freire termed banking education. This is a metaphor. It's a metaphor in which you kind of open the heads of people and drop knowledge in that head, tell them exactly what to think, turn the head around and expect that this knowledge will produce dividends as if you put the money in the bank. The banking education was an authoritarian model. It is still an authoritarian model in which education becomes essentially connected with the way that teachers work and not so much in terms of how the students interact and what they expect to receive. The student knowledge, the idea that they bring knowledge to the classroom, their voices, well, they're all neglected in many places. So I think that banking education is another of these sins that we have to preclude, we have to avoid. And one of the principles which was developed by Dewey and Freire and other great philosophers is a student-centered model. And I think we need to consider that very seriously. But a student-centered model that is not only about cognitive learning. It has to be about holistic knowledge. We all enjoy music. Why not to teach students more music, more art? Why not to teach them to observe their own feelings, their own desires, their needs in terms of human beings? If cognitive knowledge is all what matters, then we are diminishing the quality of human beings. So I think banking education lately has focused more on cognitive knowledge and the survival of the fittest. We need much more than that. And let me conclude with the fifth cluster problem of global peace, which is predatory cultures and the destruction of the planet. So what we are observing now is a planet that is being attacked because individual interest is predominated over the interest of the planet. But the planet is our only home. The planet has to be preserved. Predatory cultures take advantage of the planet, and the planet has rights. So we're now in a situation, and there are countries that are beginning to take some steps. Ecuador, for instance, I'm a Latin American expert. In Ecuador, nature has rights that individuals can invoke on behalf of nature and take the defense of nature into the court system. Not long ago, a year and a half ago, a group of indigenous women in a particular part of Ecuador defended the right of a river not to be polluted by mining companies. And it went all the way to the Supreme Court, and they won. On behalf of nature, the river could not defend itself. Individuals defended the river. Imagine what could happen if we begin to defend nature and how we can live a much more pleasant life. Not far away, and I live in one of the richest areas in the world, not far away, a well of gas began to leak. The gas company took 3 months to alert people. In the meantime, thousands and thousands of families become ill, and nobody knew what happened. And some people who had some illnesses contracted others. So finally it was discovered, and it took months to seal that particular well. But imagine, just one particular disaster ecologically could ruin our lives. Fukushima is another element in this conversation. So as I have spoken about problems, let me see solutions. I think global citizenship is a form of intervention in linking citizenship with education for sustainable development. These two elements are important because now we are becoming more interdependent, more diverse, the borders are more porous. There is a deterritorializing of citizenship practices and identities. Everybody now recognizes that there are people with more than one passport, 2 passports, 3 passports, more so in some parts of the world. There are people who speak multiple languages, more so in some parts of the world. There are people who really connect with multiple identities. In a way, all identities are multiple. It's not all about who you are as a male or female, or who you are in terms of sexual preference, or who you are in terms of religion, or who you are in terms of region in which you live, of the language that you speak, of the values that you defend. All of these are identities. Add to that the question of citizenship. Citizenship is another element of identity. So my sense of citizenship is a construction, and this construction is changing, and it's changing because of this mutual interpretation of cultures, of societies, etc. The second argument I will make is that in order to preserve peace, we need to develop a global, democratic, multicultural citizenship. Diversity is the trademark of globalization. And unless we understand that and we profit from the richness of diversity, we'll not be able to prosper as civilizations. And I will also argue that we are facing now a question about cosmopolitanism. This is a term that have been used in philosophy since the Greeks. Even Kant developed a notion of cosmopolitanism. He was very interested that people understand the cosmos in a cosmopolitan tradition. And this notion of cosmopolitanism for Kant was very important because it will invite people to receive other people. He talked about the logic of hospitality. And if you really think of the way in which the world has been formed, is through hospitality. We invite other people in our homes. We feed them. People are traveling long distances. We help them to rest. It's the sense of communality. And that is such an important concept, the question of hospitality. The world is becoming less and less hospitable. And we are now engaging in such a conflict among societies, civilizations, religions, that we may face ourselves in a no-return situation. There is a second element which I think is important for citizenship and is civic virtue. Education for citizenship should focus on the justification of rights rather than on responsibilities. But at the same time, schools, particularly schools, should foster general virtues. Let me give an example: courage, law-abidiness, loyalty. They should foster social virtues, autonomy, open-mindedness. They should foster economic virtues, work ethic, capacity to delay self-gratification like savings, and political virtues, capacity to analyze, capacity to criticize, the ability to participate in the construction of the global commons. We cannot have global citizenship unless we have global commons. And I see this as understanding the global ties, the relations and connections, and the commitment to the collective good. So here you have three terms: global citizenship, global commons, and common good. To finish this brief presentation, then I could answer some of the questions, because I believe that people will be interested in posing their own questions. I have received already some from the audience. Global commons is defined by three basic propositions. The first one is our planet is our only home, that we have to protect it through a global citizenship, sustainable development education, moving from diagnosis and denunciation into policy implementation and action, the defense of the planet. Secondly, global commons is predicated on the idea that global peace is an intangible cultural good of humanity with immaterial value. Global peace is a treasure of humanity. Here I'm always reminded of the old Greek saying that at a time of peace, the children bury the parents, and at a time of war, the parents bury the children. I think peace and a culture of peace, a reasonable culture of peace, is absolutely essential for us as civilizations to continue working, to prosper, to engage in dialogue. Third, global commons is predicated on the need to find ways that people who are all equal manage to live together democratically in an ever-growing, and I must say, dangerous, diverse world. Dangerous not because of diversity, but because we are living in a risk society. Diversity should help to prevent that risk to undermine our ability to collaborate among ourselves, to produce, to innovate, to live in peace. So, seeking to fulfill these goals, the third and great global commons is the idea that individuals' cultural interests should be to achieve their inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Academics sometimes are surprised for new developments in academia. Let me give you my 2 cents surprise of the last 10 years. The growing number of a specialized journal to discuss happiness. What is happiness? How you can achieve happiness? What is the concept of happiness across different religions? The economic returns of happiness. So there's a tremendous wealth of information out there about happiness, which tells me that's another global common, how we achieve that, but how we achieve that in the context of liberty and life. So let me stop here. It's been 20 minutes. I think I will be more than happy to answer any question you might have as the moderator, Mr. Nolan, and the people that are listening to us.
Let me take a look at our questions here. Can I have this time?
Yes.
Let me ask, one of the things that you spoke about was the changing nature of citizenship. There's a very interesting piece on American's public radio program, Planet Money, the other day, that looked at how a small island nation in the Caribbean, St. Kitts, had decided they were hit by a couple of hurricanes, and they were really in financial difficult straits. And so they decided they would sell citizenships. People, for all kinds of reasons, wanted to come to this beautiful little island in the Caribbean and be able to have a fresh start or spend the day at the beach. And so St. Kitts sells economic citizenships. If you buy a house for $400,000, you're a St. Kittian. Is there something in any way appealing to you in the idea of citizenship being a commodity that is treated now differently? Something that you might be able to buy and sell?
You put a finger on something that I think has been around for some time. What happened that this small island may have exemplified this to the extreme. But look at what happened. Remember the transition in Hong Kong, in which tycoons full of money did not trust China and moved all the money out to the West Coast in Canada and the US. We all know that in many countries of the world, in the US and other parts, if you are about to make a sizable investment, you quickly get a green card. And after you do that, obviously after several years with your green card, you renew the green card, you will obtain citizenship. It's not that you just sell citizenship, but you create the conditions for people to adopt your citizenship, right? This has been around for many, many years. And it happens because you also have other alternatives with the jus sanguinis and the jus solis. There are places on earth in which if you can prove that there is something in you, either in terms of jus sanguinis, that qualifies to obtain the other citizenship, then you will obtain a citizenship. Spain, for instance, recently discussed the question of redressing inequalities. I don't know if you remember that around 1492, the so-called discovery of America, we had something called Inquisition, which is now being recommended for some of the candidates for the US presidency as an option for some of the policies that are advocating. The Inquisition will get the Jewish people and will force them to eat pork. And if they eat pork and convert, they will then become Catholics. And if they become Catholic, they could remain in Spain. Well, a number of people were forced, even my own two families, from my mother's side, from my father's side, come from this group of people that we're talking about more than 500 years ago. Now, this idea of redressing inequality is that if you can prove that you speak Ladino and or that you have a particular last name which is incorporated in a list of last names of this particular group of Jews, then you can apply for the citizenship in Spain, which I can certainly do if I want to. So selling and buying citizenship is not new. I think the example you gave us was a fascinating example because small is beautiful. And some small countries have no choice to compete in the global competition for resources. That will be an extreme option. But what about the informal economic citizenship with a fiscal paradise? How many of our own co-citizens in this country have put away money so they avoid paying taxes in the fiscal paradise? The fiscal paradises are one of the main reasons we have a serious problem of inequality. And that is a different type of economic citizenship. Let me finish with one statement about what I will call meaning the meaning of citizenship as civic minimums. Bare minimums are necessary for citizenship. That is access to jobs, access to education, access to healthcare, affordable healthcare. Essentially, access to retraining over the lifetime. Those are the elements that constitute citizenship too. Without some of these basics, we cannot have citizenship. And those are the conditions that we are trying to develop in looking at global citizenship education.
When you talk about global education, why would we need global education when anybody with a laptop computer and internet access can use Google and find one of your lectures?
Well, obviously they don't need to come to UCLA to find me. I'm in the internet like many of us. It's probably better if you get together with somebody in person or in a classroom and make a serious discussion with these people, because the internet gives you so much. There's no question about it. But the interpersonal relationship, the ability to engage in spontaneous exchanges, the ability to ask the right question at the right time to the right person, the ability of people to come together and say, we are going to do this together, is fantastic. And the internet is a plus and a minus, as we all know, right? As we are talking about now creating a new model to protect the world, at the same time, there are people plotting terrorism in another corner of the same internet we are connected. So the plus and minuses are there. But I think the quick answer to this very pertinent question is this. We can all go global, but do actually engage in models of solidarity? We actually engage in model of transforming our lives for the better? Do we actually accept several values that will contribute to the betterment of humankind? It may or may not be the case to the internet, because if it's left only to the choice of individuals is one thing. But organized solidarity has to be done through organized systems. We need citizenship. Now, just to add another element which I think is important and I have not yet spoken about it, is the following. I don't see global citizenship substituting national citizenship or regional citizenship. We have now the European Union. The European Union have national and regional citizenship. I see not substituting, but as an add-on, adding value to national citizenship. And that means that you will have elements in global citizenship that will contribute to defend individuals in their own turf, in their own nations, when the nation state may not be able to do so. The UN has a responsibility to prevent atrocities with specific populations. Sometimes disorganized states in a civil war, a state which have decided to have a bias against particular population, do not defend individuals of this population, and then we have atrocities, and we know that. Global citizenship education is an invitation for us to defend everybody on their own human rights.
You have mentioned earlier terrorism. You just were talking about atrocities. Can global citizenship education be used to reduce the threat of terrorism? And are we losing the battle in what we think of as the civilized parts of the world in pitching our message of global peace versus global uprising?
Wells said once that our life is a race between chaos and education. And I think education is the answer to chaos. So my answer, the short answer is, while I could be pessimist in terms of intellect, I am optimist in terms of the will. I think that we will, in the end, prevail in trying to create models of organized global solidarity and global dialogue. I think that is absolutely essential. Now, you mentioned terrorism. How we can reduce terrorism? I have here with me an interesting paragraph in a document that I was studying yesterday. Let me tell you what it says. On March 5th, 2012, a non-profit organization called Invisible Children circulated in the internet a 30-minute video about Ugandan warlord Joseph Kony. You probably have heard about this. The purpose of the video...
The Lord's Resistance Army?
Yes, exactly, the Children's Army. The purpose of the video was to raise awareness about human rights violations, particularly those against children, perpetrated by Kony's Lord's Resistance Army. In a matter of days, the video entitled Kony, 2012, had over 40 million views on YouTube, 30 million plus views in Vimeo, and in the Twitter, more than 10 million tweets. See, that particular video made a tremendous contribution in safeguarding children who were the subject of this maniac who is now in jail. So they are successes. There are specific successes. This is one. There are many more. This is a form of terrorism, you see? So I am convinced that applying the proper techniques with the proper values, with the proper individuals in the proper moment, and with the topic that deserves attention, we could make a great contribution to humankind.
Those proper techniques and proper efforts can also be turned to ill. One of the things that we've seen in Europe and increasingly in the United States is a rise of extreme nationalism. People, when you talk about citizenship and loyalty to your nation, loyalty to your fellow man, that can be taken by some to mean an extreme version of nationalism, which is not inclusive, but exclusive. How do you make sure you don't make that mistake?
Well, I think you put your finger on one of the most difficult topics. I can see a set of individuals, religious fanatics, extreme right-wing nationalists, who will never accept the principles of global citizenship, because global citizenship is the antithesis and perhaps the antidote to this kind of models. In many different ways, my answer to you is the internet is not neutral, could be used for good or for bad, but digital culture is not neutral, could be used for good or for bad. It's a choice, and it's a moral choice. And I think one of the conversations that you have developed before is about the moral choice of global education. My answer, very simply put, is this. You cannot solve extreme nationalism by just persuasion. You need a systematic model of public policy and education that will intervene and will monitor activities of those people who will never be convinced that this is a great idea. So in a way, peace is central to this process, but peace needs to be protected.
One of the things that when you talk about selling people or convincing people, one of the principal elements that good salesmen look for is some incentive, this is what you're going to get out of it when they try and sell you a car, a year's membership at a health club, or one of those treadmills you put in your basement and never use. What is an economic incentive or some incentive that you might use in your pitch to those ultra-nationalists that are rising up so successfully in Europe and here in the United States that says, listen, it's going to work better for you if we're inclusive because, take it, Professor.
Well, it's, again, education is a long-term process. I can imagine what would be to be sitting here with a member of the Ku Klux Klan and try to make that argument, right?
Yes.
With this individual, was 2 or 3 or 1, he played with every kid, no matter the color. He played around sharing toys, things like that, that this individual, imaginary individual sitting here in my living room, would never do. So education is a long-term process. It requires social cohesion. It requires a specific model of education that allows for dialogue and solidarity. What I will say is this. First of all, the world is changing, and we shall be ready to change along the world. Now, people will say, no, I don't want to change. Nobody wants change. Look, in the university, people don't want to change. I mean, we have this fascinating dilemma of very radical university professors when it comes down to their own profession. They don't want to move an inch away from our perks. So change is always traumatic and difficult. But reality is there. We have to accept change. But in accepting change, we have to discuss who benefits, who loses. At this moment, I spoke about the idea of global neoliberalism. Those who are winning are very powerful countries in the detriment of the rest. Those who are winning are the powerful corporations in the detriment even of family capitalism in our societies. So my point being that there are advantages of working together. Secondly, it is to the cost benefit of society to make that we expend less energy, that we live in housing that essentially is more cost effective. Just an example. I just had a long conversation. I helped a colleague of mine, an architect, discussing the question of sustainability in building. He's going to build a clinic. This clinic will be in an area where extreme weather, very hot in the summer, very cold in the winter, not more than 3 hours from where I stay. So we're talking about this, and I said to him, okay, give me a proof that by installing solar panels, which could be made here in the US, of course, and in many cases are the best, you will make savings. He said to me, look, a clinic of this nature, only in the expenditure of energy, the expenditure of electricity, will spend between $45,000 to $60,000 a year. With this model that I have designed, we are reducing that to 10%. 10%. All right. You know what that means? So if I'm a doctor, I reduce to 10% my expenditure in energy, I could lower my prices, right? I could become more affordable. I could attract more people through better insurances. So essentially, some of these choices, they are ecological choices, they are political choices, they are economic choices, will benefit everyone. And it's a trickle-down effect in several ways, because if I pay less, then I can charge less. If I charge less, I have many more customers. If I have many more customers, I'm a doctor, so I'm looking at more people, I'm probably extending the lifetime of a number of individuals. It's a trickle-down process in the different way that it has been considered trickle-down. Why? Making savings help our way of life. And he was absolutely convinced what he's doing is tremendous. But then he added other elements, which are very important. He added wonderful windows. And I said, this is wonderful. You have these very brand new windows. And we concluded that it was to the betterment, because you are in an office of a doctor. You are concerned about your health care. And suddenly you are looking at a park. Some of the window will look at a park. And you know the serenity when you are looking at nature. Other window will look at mountains with snow. All those things are serenity. So it really settles you down. That helps the improvement of your perspective about life, about your healthcare, about your illness. And the doctor at the same time feel in better environment. And those windows are infinitely more cost effective than the windows that we bought that I have in this house, because they are double pane and so on. So there are great progress in specific techniques to help us to progress. How can we convince people who don't have a job? Well, very difficult. How we convince the youth, the neo-Nazi who hates everybody now because they are all tattooed in every part of their body, and they said to everybody, I hate you. You know what happened? What is the utopia of these kids? What is the utopia of this neo-Nazi? There is no utopia, because the future has already been denied by not having access to good jobs. So the quest for jobs is one of the answers to these great dilemmas. And finally, people argue, well, you know, these immigrants, I live in California. We produce probably between 40 to 60% of the produce that is being sold in the rest of the US. You think that the majority of the people collecting strawberries about 20 minutes from my house are American citizens? No, they are not. And they are not because they are being paid a very small salary, although California has one of the best salaries in the country. And it's a very difficult job from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. It's a tough job to do. It's a tough job to do. People who have other options prefer other options. See, in California, in every single survey, we love immigrants because we need them for doing a number of things that nobody wants to do. And it's a fact.
One of the things you've just been talking about is selling people on the idea of saving money. And that's a good, that's a great incentive. That's a great way to sell something. People think, oh, okay, good. But one of the things you talked about earlier, when you talked about protecting nature, protecting the planet, you have to sell people on something costing them money, pollution controls, for instance. Is for advanced countries like the United States, Western Europe, is it a better argument to make instead of talking about the sort of poetry of this nature that we are a part of? Is it better to talk about the economic idea of dealing with what the economists call uncaptured costs? If you pollute my stream and I drink it, I incur a cost because I get sick. If you pollute my air, my children get asthma, and I and all my neighbors incur a cost because they get asthma. Should we begin a larger conversation about the uncaptured costs that are hurting our planet?
Absolutely essential. Absolutely essential. I'm with you 100% on this. Let me give a concrete example, and very important. You know what is the great healthcare crisis of our country in the US? Obesity. Obesity. And I live in California, which is a state obsessed with physical conditioning, right? But obesity has all the conditions for us to have serious, serious illnesses. So you are absolutely right. People try to speak about defending the planet has a high cost. And so people will say, well, it's a short-term pain for long-term gain. And in a way, it is. It is. The extension of healthcare will help all of us to get less ill. The cleaning up of the pollution, good water, good air, etc., always to be recommended and not to be suffering. So my sense is that you are absolutely right. There are different strategies. Some of them are more economic oriented than others, but there are many economic interests against it. Particularly the fossil fuel model, the fossils should remain in the ground, should not be collected. Look at what just happened in China. China signed with us this agreement in Paris. And shortly after, they have diminished the production of coal. Of course, 100,000 people got unemployed in the northern part of Africa, in the area connected with Russia. But at the same time, the quality of air improved dramatically in most of the larger cities. So what do? You reorient the labor force that got unemployed. Just to finish with that, one concrete example from one of the richest countries on earth, Switzerland. We all know that Switzerland produces extraordinary watches for centuries. In the 60s and 70s, the Japanese came out with the kind of Seiko model, which was infinitely cheaper to produce, very efficient, not with the same glamour, and that automatically creates a large unemployment in Switzerland, a very rich society, per capita perhaps the richest on earth. 80 to 100,000 highly educated watchmakers, knowing how to work in a very small space with very small amount of material, got unemployed. They couldn't compete with the They compete later on, but in the first 10 years, they didn't know what to do. So they retrained this labor force, many retired, of course. They retrained the labor force to work in other areas. Switzerland began to develop, they had enough capital to do this, all these particular micro elements that we incorporate into our bodies, pacemakers and other parts that you do. And what they did, these are many small things too. They retrained these guys who knew how to operate a little watch inside a camera, which is 1/3 of an inch by 1/3 of an inch, for an implant that will go in our bodies. And they were retrained very well. And a new industry was born. And now all this medical equipment is done in Switzerland because they had the manpower. So the question is not how many people will be unemployed. The question is, there will be people unemployed. How you retrain them into a new orientation, a new life, and how you support that retraining financially. If you unemploy people, you let them out there in the cold, that creates a lot of animosity. And then you have these people claiming against the immigrants, against the government. What we are seeing now in the US is a vote of rage. People are voting not with their heads, but with the heart and the range for what they perceive their country is being taken away from them.
Seems like they're voting with their spleen. We're having a difficult time sorting out who we want to have as our next president. It's giving people a rash just to have a regular election. How would we go about choosing how to govern something like the global citizenship education? What would be, would it be like a UN? What would be the thing that gave it direction, that exchanged ideas, that began to develop programs that were for mutual cooperation?
Well, your question is so relevant. I will say that we need somebody who understands the world and how the world is changing and how it is impacting in this context the US. Everybody should say the same about their own country. We need somebody who understands that we need dialogue. Citizenship is about dialogue, and it's about conflict resolution. This idea that you will solve this problem with carpet bombing, this other problem building a wall, this other problem expelling people from the country, these are short-term solutions for long-term problems. So as a solution, they don't work. And in terms of problem, they magnify what is already natural in our society. So we need somebody with a vision, but a vision that will engage a very fragmented society, fraction society, into some national conversation, what it means to be transforming ourselves and what are the values that this particular society, which has been a society that has embraced the immigrant, need to uphold at the moment. So there are two particular areas in any government that pertain to global citizenship education in the context of the US. I would say first and foremost, the Department of State. The Department of State, that's why we have the UNESCO Commission for the US. The Department of State plays a major role in creating the conditions for dialogue across countries, for conflict resolution, putting down a fire if needed, or eventually come up with a proposal to attack a particular problem that seems to be too resilient. And the Department of Education. The Department of Education is not in charge of educational policy in this country. We are different than the majority of the world. Consider France, highly centralized. What the Ministry of Education says and does impact the country. We have 50 states, and we have an office with a budget, an important budget, that could make a big difference. If the Department of Education in the US decides to invest in citizenship building and incorporate to the question of citizenship building, which is a combination of civics and more elements of conviviality, then we probably have a chance. But to do that, we have to have at the helm of the country somebody who understands these international relations and who understands the value of a culture of peace.
Can global citizenship education also contribute to a solution to one of the other really big problems that we don't talk about perhaps as much as we should. One of the things that the Boston Global Forum is trying to talk about, the issue of cybersecurity, something that now is mostly annoying because people steal your credit card, but certainly holds the threat that it may in the near-term future involve power systems, water systems, nuclear plants, all kinds of things that are very scary.
Well, I think I'm scared. I'm personally very scared of this because, you see, let me go back for a second to a recent past. The recent past was the Cold War. I'm not going to justify nothing. I'm just saying the deterrent policy worked. You have two sets of countries who control the atomic bomb. And you know that technically we have now the technical condition to destroy our civilizations if we unleash an atomic bomb, a set of atomic bombs. So the deterrent was, well, here you have the Soviet Union, the US, and there was some open and hidden channels of communication in such a way that they agree to do their business as states, but not to drop the bomb. The Cold War is over, and now we have multiplicity of powers, medium powers, etc., who could eventually emerge in this confrontation of wills and could undermine our ability to survive as civilization. So the first element I will say is that that explicit, open, or hidden articulation of interest is no longer there. And it's a situation in which everybody's on their own, and it applies to policy, it applies to economics, and it applies to security. Cybersecurity is an issue that will haunt us because we are always facing the changing dilemmas. On the one hand, the idea that we need to protect the individual and their own rights, and of course the privacy. On the other hand, we need to protect societies and the ability of the society to operate, and we cannot operate if money is siphoned from one end to the other by a group of bandits. So education has a role to play. I said in my previous conversation, the Global Boston Forum, that we have to look at digital culture in two levels. One level is the question of honor, how we can develop honorable individuals, which is a role for education, that articulate their work inside the digital culture, but they do it with a sense of honor, honorability, and a sense of ethics. So we need an ethics for the internet that will be discussed worldwide. And the second element that I said is the question of the truth. Here you have the most important dilemma in the context of philosophy. What is the truth? What is truthful? How you define that this is truthful and it's not? So the whole conversation around truth is very important. And truth is also about facts. Is this fact truthful or not? Can we identify this fact or not? So in the end, my argument about truth is that not everything that appears in the context of the global internet is truthful. We have plenty of blogs beaming lies, beaming innuendo, beaming things that essentially undermine the ability of people to communicate, to dialogue, to live in peace, or to even make a serious investment in their own areas of the world. So truthfulness should be part of this conversation about ethics. And one of the interesting things about academia is that we come to academia with some credentials. I'm hired after people look at all my credentials, my books, etc. My colleagues evaluate each one of us, so you get promoted, etc. When we are in our classrooms, we have almost I need to state the most profound truth that we have understood in our studies. I've been in this business for more than 45 years. Why should I go into one of my classrooms and not tell them the best I have learned? That you cannot guarantee through the internet. You guarantee through the individual responsibility, you guarantee through the institutional responsibility, and you guarantee through the research abilities of the people that finds ways to incorporate better models of conviviality of people living together. So those are the great dilemmas, as you put it. Not only that the people can siphon off at this very moment we are talking about money from your bank account, or can take your credit cards when you are walking in the street, but also the ability of people to convince you about half-truths or about falsehood that you cannot identify as such. We need a systematic education about how we discern, the idea of discernment. And this question of discernment is central for the question of global citizenship education.
And education goes hand in hand with that. Boston Global Forum is doing these dialogues in connection with the G7 summit. What suggestion would you make to the G7 leaders about how to more effectively promote peace and security through global citizenship education?
Well, I think I'm not qualified to tell leaders what to do. I can give my opinion as an academic, a scholar, as somebody who really travels the world. What I will say to them is people want this. This is a win-win for everybody. People want peace. People want the protection of the planet. People want happiness. And these are the global commons. So the first thing I will say is they want it. And from a political perspective, it's very good if you do what the people want, because then you get reelected. Secondly, I will say to them, embrace it with no qualifications. Embrace it. This is not to promote the UN as the supra-world country. This is to find ways to promote conflict resolution through dialogue. This is to find ways to have better interactions. This is to have ways to interrupt inequality. And everybody should agree that these levels of inequality will cause, over time, chaos. As I said, we are in a race between chaos and education. Embrace global citizenship education.
There was a piece in the Boston Globe recently about research done here at Harvard that determined that the greatest contributor to happiness, we were talking about the importance of that earlier, was relationships. It's good for our listeners and viewers to have a relationship with someone as thoughtful and distinguished as you. Thanks for joining us today, Professor.
I enjoy our conversation very much, Barry, and I thank the Boston Global Forum for their invitation. It's been a delight.
Take care.
You too.
Wonderful.